Well, this connection to rivers, um, how did that come up for you? Were you interested in water and that stuff as a kid?
I was in a Boy Scout troop that did a lot of backpacking in the Sierra Nevada of California, and so I certainly enjoyed the camping, but I had no concept of running rivers until actually 1960. I hiked into Phantom Ranch, and at the time, hiking down the Kaibab Trail and up the Bright Angel Trail was not something that many people did. Unlike today when you can see hundreds of people on the trail. Then I just looked at the Colorado River even in 1960 and just wondered, where does that river go? And it certainly was something that impressed on my memory that this would be fun to do someday. But I had little idea that anybody was floating down the river or that it was possible. I guess I'd heard about the fearsome rapids on the Colorado River and sort of discounted the idea of ever being able to do that myself until this group at UCLA decided they would run Glen Canyon, and that was a fairly easy section of the Colorado River, but certainly a very dramatically beautiful one. Subsequently, I found articles that my mother had cut out of the Los Angeles Times back in the mid-50s talking about the controversy with dams up in Dinosaur National Monument, and even talking about the original authorization of Glen Canyon. And she had cut these out for me, assuming that I would read them, but I never did at the time, and I certainly have regretted the fact many times that I didn't pay more attention to these articles that she was cutting out of the paper for me.
Now, why would she cut those out? Why would you think you'd be interested?
I don't know why she did. She knew that I certainly enjoyed the outdoors. I didn't know exactly what field I was going to pursue, and I think she probably cut a lot of articles out of the paper about many different subjects, but she, I guess, knew that Los Angeles was dependent on water from distant sources, and so she had read these articles, and I guess she just thought someday they might be of interest to me. And certainly some of the Life magazine articles that she cut out have been of great interest to me in later years.
Do you still have all that?
Oh yeah.
Well, but you did Glen Canyon, it was 61?
62 is when I floated Glen Canyon.
So this was
just prior to when they finally closed the gates. They had actually backed water up just a little bit upstream from Glen Canyon Dam in 1962, up, I think, to the crossing of the Fathers. But we basically were able to do the entire river trip unimpeded by any evidence of Lake Powell when we did float it in 1962.
What did you think about the dam at that point in time?
What did she think about the dam?
What did you think about it?
Oh, what did I think about the dam? I was certainly not happy to know that this entire area of river was going to be flooded, and I became very active in the controversy in 1965 when there were plans afoot to build dams in the Grand Canyon, and that's when the famous Sierra Club ad came out in the Washington Post and the New York Times. Would you flood the Sistine Chapel to get closer to the ceiling? And the IRS revoked the Sierra Club tax-exempt status, and their membership went from 40,000 to about 120,000 within less than a year, because a lot of people were very uptight about the fact that this nice little conservation organization was being reprimanded by the IRS. Anyway, I got very involved in reading congressional testimony and writing letters to all kinds of House and Senate appropriation committees not to build dams in the Grand Canyon.
Were you involved deeply with the Sierra Club as well?
I was a Sierra Club member for a number of years, and so that probably also gave me a little push in the direction of river conservation.
Do you remember, did you have contact with Martin through all that?
I didn't meet Martin Litton until quite a bit later, after I actually began running rivers in the Grand Canyon.
Were you aware of his participation in that?
Somehow I don't think I ever knew the name Martin Litton, or if I did, it was just one of many names that crossed my mind, and so I never thought there was much chance of me actually meeting the guy.
What, coming from the perspective of having run operations on so many different rivers and been a part of so many, it's amazing to me. I mean, these exploratories to explore the BO, that sounds wild. Where does the Grand Canyon fit for you? You know, in the middle of such a broad array of river experience.
Well, Grand Canyon is certainly, as I said, next to Glen Canyon, my favorite canyon. And it is the river operation that I'm most infatuated with because of the tremendous beauty here, the real wilderness quality of the canyon, and certainly the rapids with the excitement that they bring to passengers and to the guides that are actually running the boat. The Grand Canyon is certainly, right now, number one in terms of my interest. If I can just throw out one little backtrack, between 1962 and 1965, actually from 62 to 67, I spent a lot of time on the rising waters of Lake Powell in a fold boat. We bought a collapsible fold boat from Germany that we were able to pack into a variety of places on Lake Powell. We hiked down at Hole in the Rock one year and assembled our boat at the bottom, and then we'd paddle 50 to 100 miles on a trip exploring all the side canyons of Lake Powell as the reservoir was inundating the various side canyons. And we would go to the back of these various side canyons and then get out on foot and explore further up the reaches of these very narrow canyons, many of which were so narrow at the bottom that you could reach both sides with your arms outstretched. And sometimes with the fold boat, we couldn't quite get to the back of the canyon, and so we'd have to get out of the fold boat very gingerly, getting up into a chimney position, and then moving horizontally another 50 or 100 or 150 feet to get to a point where we could step out on dry land. And then we'd explore as far as we could until we'd hit a major jump up. And we kept going back to the same canyons as the reservoir level was increasing in the mid-60s, because we'd frequently be able to get into reaches of the canyons that we had not yet seen because they were above a major jump up. The loss of Glen Canyon, to me, was the biggest loss that I've suffered. I guess I've been fairly fortunate in my life. Although my father died a number of years ago, he was in his 90s, and I knew that that was what happened to people as they get older. So I haven't had any wrenching dislocations in my life except the loss of Glen Canyon. That was certainly a gem that is a major loss, not only to me personally, but to many other people that did see it, and to the millions of people that would like to be a part of Glen Canyon today, if only the reservoir wasn't there.
I wonder, why is it, you think, that we need places like that?
We need places like Glen Canyon because they free people's inner sense of who they are and where they fit in this world, and they give a tremendous sense of tranquility and peace. Basically a place where you can go for some restoration, some rejuvenation.
And I wonder why that is. I wonder why we get that in places like this.
what we get from places
No,
like
why?
that?
I wonder why it is that I wonder why we are rejuvenated by places like this, as opposed to the urban environment.
I think the tranquility, the the awesome canyon walls, the sound of moving water. These are all things that many people find very calming and just awe-inspiring.
Have you? Did you? What was your perception of the Bureau of Reclamation then? Did you come into contact with any of the individuals involved at
No,
that?
no individuals, just the Bureau of Reclamation was, to me, a pretty faceless organization. I remember a publication they put out in the early 60s called Jewel of the Colorado. Dramatically beautiful photographs of Glen Canyon. What they didn't tell you was that most of the things they showed in these photographs were going to be inundated by the rising waters of Lake Powell. And I thought it to be a tremendous sham for this publication to be printed at taxpayers' expense with these beautiful color photographs basically as a sell job as to the value of these dam building activities.
Do you sense a shift in the Bureau's perspective these days?
Oh yes, there's been a tremendous shift in the policy of the Bureau of Reclamation. They're much more recreation friendly at this point, and just the fact that they're studying the impact of Glen Canyon Dam on the down reaches of the Colorado River shows that they are now much more attuned to the fact that dams do cause major environmental impact, and they're actually studying what they can do to mitigate those impacts.
So where does this trip fit into that?
Well,
Could you describe this trip a little bit, and then where does that fit into that
sure.
scenario?
This trip has been set up with a number of the geologic survey people that are primarily focused, as I understand it, on the debris transport studies to look at debris flows that have come out of many of the side canyons of the Grand Canyon over time, and the process by which those debris flows and the rapids that they cause are modified by the Colorado River at high flows. And they have historical photos which show some of those debris flows, but many of them, which theoretically have occurred in the past, have been totally obliterated by the force of floods coming down the Colorado River. And so one of the major hopes on this trip is that some of these early river runners who have been in the canyon anywhere from 1938 up until the mid-60s before the impacts of Glen Canyon Dam, they're hoping that some of them will have either recollections or photographs showing some of the large debris flow remnants that have subsequently been removed by the water of the Colorado.
What's it feel like to be on a trip with? Who are these guys, and what's it feel like to be on a trip with?
Well, there are a lot of people here that have a lot more river running experience than I do on the Colorado River system. Bob Rigg is here, and Lois Jotter, and it's really interesting to feel part of this fraternity of people that have seen the Colorado River at a very early historical time. So it's a real pleasure to be on a trip with them and to just hear some of their anecdotal stories telling about specific things that they recall from the time that they were running the river.
Since 1965, has this thing changed very much since the time that you first saw it?
the biggest change that I have seen has been in the removal of beach sand. Many of the beaches are considerably smaller, and some of them have pretty much been removed totally by the rise and flow of the Colorado River with the releases coming out of Glen Canyon Dam. So that's the biggest change that I've seen. And then the increased evidence of the tamarask along the shore that has been allowed to take root on some beaches that haven't been impacted by high water surges of over 100,000 cubic feet per second as they were historically.